Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Talking About the Big Stuff podcast with Michael Cole. Today, I do not have a guest. I'm going to be talking to you by myself. Um, it's something that I had thought about doing a couple weeks ago. Didn't really have a guest a couple weeks ago, so I wasn't sure what to do. And I was like, I need to get comfortable with the idea of doing an episode here and there by myself, coming up with a topic. I did not have a topic. That was the week that I missed a few weeks ago. But this week I do have a topic that I want to talk about by myself, and kind of just see how this works without a person to bounce ideas off of. Um, so the topic that I want to talk about today is depression. Um, I've made some references throughout the episodes about the fact that I have depression, and it's something that it's always big for me during the fall. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of my story, and then I'm going to talk about my current state. So to give you an idea of where I'm at as far as depression, so I was diagnosed as manic depressive in at some point in the fall of 2002. So it's been 20 years since I was diagnosed. I only remember it because it was my senior year. It was the fall of that senior year. Um, by the time that I was diagnosed, I had been depressed mostly but on and off for between 4 and 5 years. Um, and so now I've been depressed on and off for 25 years. It is not something that really goes away. Um, it it I struggled figuring out different medicines and different things and seeing. I've seen several therapists. I've been diagnosed by, I think at last count that I can remember, it was three different doctors, um, which is interesting. An interesting point of contention because I get a lot of people that get to know me who don't see it at first, and they when I I'm fairly open about it. I don't think it's something to be ashamed of, and I've always kind of been open about it. And when I talk to people, I had aunts and uncles that didn't believe it at first. um, I don't think my mother and father well, I don't know, they knew something was wrong but they didn't know what was going on. My in-laws, when I was meeting my wife, like, it's been pretty consistent that people don't believe it because everybody has an idea in their head of what manic depression is. I think, and if this is so this was 20 years ago. The last time I spoke to a new doctor about it was about 15 years ago. So it's been a while. So I think some of the terminology has changed. I don't know that they use manic depression anymore. I think that they use bipolar, and I think there's bipolar type 1, type 2, type 3. Um, and so I think what I have falls into that category. I've been always kind of fast and loose with the terminology. Uh, for a shorthand, I've always said bipolar because people have an idea of that better than manic depression. Um, but if I'm being honest, I don't know whether it's type 1, type 2, or type 3. Um, it's it's uh it's normal. It's who I am. It eventually becomes your baseline, and you don't even. It's not that you're not aware of it, but it's what I imagine any other thing that isn't the way you were born. I mean, I guess I was probably born this way, but like the first few years, the first 12 to 13 years of my life, I wasn't depressed. I think that's something that came on with puberty, and it's possible it's trauma related to some extent because I was bullied fairly severely around the time it started, but it's also just possible that coincides. Um, but it is, like I've said, it is who I am. Um, Around the time. So I was getting fairly straightened out, getting things on track and figuring things out. And then I met my wife, Sarah, who was on a couple months ago. Um, and things have been pretty good since then. And as far as my depression, but it has never gone away. And so I kind of just was like, oh, I can live like this, and the so I got into the habit of just living with my depression. When you have manic depression or bipolar disorder, many people are familiar with the ups and the downs. Um, Personally, I don't know that this is the case for everybody, but the ups can be really, it's like a high, it or being drunk. It's very, if nobody gets in your way, it's fun. And when I say when if nobody gets in your way, because sometimes people who care about you see you acting a bit up or manic and will call you out on it because out of concern, and that really is a shitty that like that's a real easy way to bring you down quick. And that's not to blame the people that care about you, that is just like that's the truth of it. Nobody wants to be called on their shit when they're feeling great. You want to be noticed when you're feeling shitty. Unfortunately, manic is easier to spot a lot than depressive. Ultimately, it's the manic side becomes, addictive in its own way. And if you can get to the point where you're comfortable with the depressive and the and you're not, the depression isn't, it's not, it became my baseline, so it wasn't that big, it didn't seem like that big of a deal. um it became easy to justify in order to keep getting the manic side of things. And if I was not a father, I could probably live very comfortably that way, or like I could comfortably in the sense of like functionality wise, I could function. Not necessarily in the sense of like it was good for me, comfortability. Um, you could do that for I could do that for arguably forever, but at some point in the last year or so, I recognized that it was not a great thing as a father. It was not a great thing to have that in going on in front of my son, is to an extent where I could help it. Obviously, I there is some of this that is beyond my control, but there's some of it that like was me just kind of giving into it. And I say giving into it meaning like I'm not medicated. I haven't been medicated in a while. It has not been a problem. It's I I at this point it is so subtle that I don't think I need medication. Even um, and I've talked to doctors, and that was a mutual decision. But it wasn't necessarily, what is healthy for we'll say like what's healthy for a 29-year-old or whatever single man, or even a 29-year-old married man, is not necessarily great for a 38-year-old married man with a kid. So ultimately, I needed to make some changes. And so I've been in that process for the last, I guess since June. I've been really hardcore working on it. I started exercising. That will help curb a lot of it. It's not a cure for it. It's definitely not going to solve the problem altogether, but it getting the right chemical balance and endorphins, and dealing with being more physically fit and being more healthy in what I'm taking in food wise, has evened me out a lot over the last 6 months, or I guess it's been a little less than 6 months, but you get the point. Um, but then, uh, there was another side of things that I had to work on that was not physical fitness, and that this was the real hard side. Uh, and I kind of mentioned this. I don't remember if it made it into the episode or not, but in my episode with Wes, where we talked about behavioral health, I mentioned. So, for a lack of a better way of putting it, if you think about the character of Gollum and Smeagol in the Lord of the Rings movies, Gollum is the bad side. Smeagol is the former hobbit who's kind of been corrupted and but like is the more innocent side. um I have an inner monologue when I get depressed that is very similar, in that, like, in the Lord of the Rings, it's, no one likes you, and it's very bad self-talk, and that's where I get. And it's been, I genuinely don't remember the beginning of it. I would guess that it goes back to about high school, because I remember the first couple years of depression. I blamed everybody else, and then at some point it changed inward, and I started hating myself. So one of the things I've worked on in the last 6 months, in addition to keeping physically fit or getting physically fit and trying to work on things from that side of things, has been not allowing myself negative self-talk. And that sounds, to people who have it, that might sound impossible, and to people who don't really have it, that might sound like the easiest thing in the world. And it is neither. It is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult because it is essentially, it becomes like rote. And it becomes, it's, if you think about the rosary or other prayers, things you do as a habit that you may not even necessarily be aware, you biting your fingernails, other things like that, it became that for me. So making an effort to not allow myself to do it, to not do it, became, every time it started, having to pull my fingernail out of my teeth, like that kind of thing, where I had to literally stop myself, and I would get very shortly into it. And I will say this: I've been doing it for at least since July, maybe since June. I can't remember specifically. I've been working on not allowing myself negative thoughts, and it has started to get easier, in the sense that it is not as immediate. My brain wants to go there, but it is constant. My mom smoked for a few years before I was born. I don't know how long, but she stopped when she got pregnant with me. She hasn't smoked in 38 years, and she said this as long as I can remember, but even recently she said this, that when she's still a smoker in her dreams, and I can understand that, because it feels like I my brain at some point became wired this way, whether that was natural or, you know me doing that as a coping thing or whatever, and un deprogramming my brain from that has been very difficult. There were nights in the last 6 months where, so like, if I had a it used to be how I would fall asleep, was telling myself that I sucked and that I was a piece of shit. And without having that ability to do that, I have I've had a lot of nights where I've struggled to fall asleep, and I've talked to my wife about it, and explained to her what I'm doing and what I'm trying to do and going through, and I just said, like, I'm exhausted. Like, it is exhausting. It's like trying to not bite your fingernails, or not trying to not do that thing, when that thing also is the thing that helps you sleep, is borderline impossible, it feels like. And so it just makes it very difficult to sleep. So that's what I've been working on. The reason, so yeah, that's what I've been working on with myself. Um, Now I want to transition from talking about that aspect of me to talking about a second piece, which is seasonal depression. Um, my depression has always been the worst in the fall. Um, there are certain triggers that I think that happen, but I think it's also seasonal, or it's compounded by seasonal depression. Um, and I so it usually starts Labor Day weekend because that's my birthday. That is that is the signal that fall is coming, and it has always been this big crisis moment um, up until the last couple of years. The This year, all summer long, I have been feeling as good as I have. I've been as happy as I've ever been, as I can ever remember being for any extended period of time all summer. And then the fall came, and seasonal depression came with it. And it is different than it has ever been before. Because seasonal depression compounded with manic depression, bipolar, whatever, is was it it threatened to break me every single year. Seasonal depression by itself is this strange separate thing. I would say imagine being deliriously fluish and then getting shit faced. That is seasonal depression mixed with the bipolar disorder. And then all of a sudden you get shit faced, but you don't have the flu. That's what this has felt like. And not necessarily like, I mean, shit faced can be good for some people, but that's not what I mean. Um, it's just a matter of like, there are certain layers of it that aren't there right now, but also there's some clarity in the fact that like most of what I'm feeling right now is seasonal depression. And so I've wondered for a long time how much was which. And now I have this bit of clarity. Um Ultimately, I think that depression has manifested itself in a lot of different ways. Um I have a lot of mental depression, but I also, and I don't know that I don't know that so there's a physical component to depression, and I don't mean like, oh, go for a run, because the runs haven't been helping. Working out has not been helping this particular aspect. There's this physical sense in depression, and if you it feels like a fog, and I feel it most gray days, even during the summer. If it was a gray day, I would feel it to some extent this summer. Um, but it's it's like a sense of trying to walk through water. Like everything just feels heavier, and you're like everything feels like more effort. Um, and that has been what I've been feeling, and I've always felt that to some extent. But I during the fall, but it's been mixed with Gollum, in my head going, nobody loves you, you're worthless. And now it is a bit weird. One benefit that has always happened during the fall, and I was glad to not lose this year, is that as a writer, I have always had more motivation and more inspiration to write in the fall. And I did wonder if that would go away if I worked on the regular depression. But luckily, I have been writing quite a bit. I've been able to stay relatively focused when I'm writing, and keep motivated and inspired, and um, that has been great. Um, that's the benefit of it for me. I am sure in the last 6 months that I have dealt with some manic episodes, some higher up episodes. I don't know that I can pinpoint them very well. Um, and I think that's a good thing. It probably means that they're not as high up. And I definitely haven't had as low lows, but um, the reason I wanted to talk about this is this episode comes pretty much dead center in the worst time of the year for me. Um, I've been feeling it every single day for weeks. Unfortunately, because I had a cold, you probably can hear in my voice a little bit. Because I had a cold, I wasn't able to work out for a week or so. That was not helping things. Um, I'm I'm pretty much back to normal, so I've been able to start working out again, and I do feel a little bit better in that way. But it has it has been really rough couple weeks, with just the seasonal depression. It's not a like worrisome rough. It's more like a frustrated rough. It's getting motivated to do anything, feeling enthusiastic has been there, but none of the real toxic parts of it. Um, and this podcast has become something that I look forward to doing every week. It has also become something that staying on top of as far as getting guests and doing things has become more difficult in the fall. You like I said earlier, I missed an episode a couple weeks ago. Um, I was lucky that 2 weeks ago, my friend Matthew was able to record 2 episodes with me in a conversation long enough to be 2 episodes. So that was great. So I could take 2 weeks. I'm thinking that possibly I am going to try to do that going forward. Have 2 episodes at a time, but I want you to know that if I miss an episode, it's very possible it was a combination of scheduling. Obviously, work. Everybody's work is always busy. My work has been busy, so sometimes I don't have the energy when I get out of work. The working out has, it's great, but it also means that I get tired earlier. So I'm not trying to make excuses. I just want you to know that if I miss a week, it's not that I'm giving up on the podcast or anything like that. It's just that ultimately I need to make sure that I'm prioritizing the podcast properly, meaning not just that I am, obviously the podcast is important to me, but I also I need to prioritize some level of quality to it. I think that I sometimes get too focused on putting something out instead of putting something good out. I hope that this episode's not an example of that. It's just that sometimes I worry. I know we live in this world of algorithms, and I worry that if I miss an episode, I know when I was doing some YouTube stuff a few years ago, I would get like that too. It's not a great sense. It's not a great thing for. It doesn't work well. It's not super compatible with my mentality, because I end up putting too much pressure on myself, and then I end up getting frustrated, and it's not healthy. So this episode is to genuinely talk about something that I've alluded to a couple times over the last 2 3 months, um, but also to kind of um, just explain so that you understand where I'm coming from, if I miss an episode, or if if there's other issues. So I guess I didn't mean for this to be like a humorless episode. I've tried to keep some level of humor in each of the episodes, and there are a million stories that I would like to tell, uh, that I think are funny, and I will say I have a really dark sense of humor, and part of that is a coping mechanism. Um, when my talk about my dad a little bit, because I don't think he listens to the podcast, but he does not like. I he has not historically liked the idea of me talking about him in the past, but I'm going to talk about him because it's all good stuff. When I was around the time that I was starting to deal with depression, just coincidentally, my dad was dealing with um, he had precancerous colon polyps, and he came home and he sat my sister down, and my sister and I down, and I would have been 14ish, and she was like 12, could have been 15 and 13, I don't remember. It would have been around 99, and he told us what was going on. They weren't cancerous yet, but they were precancerous. They were gonna get ahead of it. They were gonna remove them, and it was and he wasn't worried about it. And I sat in probably more like not knowing what to talk about, not knowing what to say or think. But my sister started crying because she was a little bit younger, and it was scary. And my dad's response was, with a big smile, "What are you crying about? Miserable bastards like me don't die." And it's it's been it started something that, I was 14, so I would have expected it. Looking back, you'd think it would have earlier, but that's the moment I started thinking about humor as a coping mechanism, especially gallows humor, dark humor. I know we went to some things with him after he had the surgery to get that removed, and when people would ask where he'd been, he would say, "I had to have a foot removed from my ass because they had taken a foot of his colon out." So, um, the jokes just kept coming, and I mean, looking back, maybe they aren't the funniest, but at the time, with the amount of tension there was there, it was hysterical to me. My dad has Alzheimer's, and he was diagnosed about 4 years ago, maybe closer to 5 years ago. I think 4.5 years ago. And my dad was not the happiest person in the world. He wasn't particularly happy. He was always loving, but then not always happy. And around the time that I married Sarah and stuff, he started being, he just, his demeanor changed a lot. He showed up to more family things. He just became more what I would consider like publicly like cuddly, not like cuddly in the physical sense, but in just like a little less bristly. And when he got diagnosed with Alzheimer's in, I guess it was 2018, he at some point in that first year, him and I were joking about it so much, and we still joke about. I mean, anytime he forgets to do anything, he blames it on the Alzheimer's. And anytime any of us forget anything, he asks if we've got what he's got. But at one point, we we're talking, and he said, and I said to him, "You told Sam and I a long time ago that miserable bastards like you didn't die." And I said, and then you got happy. You were literally visibly more happy in life, and now you have this thing that's going to kill you given long enough. And he laughed and he said, "So it's my fault." His fault, meaning. And um and it was, it's how we've dealt with it. But the the humor around it has largely been how I've dealt with my depression too. You know, the darkest thing about me has been the depression. With him, it's we've joked about the possibility of him dying. We were joking about it 20 years ago in regards to stuff, just the hypothetical of him dying as an old man someday. He would talk about taking him to the top of the stairs in a wheelchair and dumping him down and being like, thanks dad for whatever, he would say that. We never made that joke. That was his joke. Matthew, who was on the show the last two episodes, is a great example. I can't think of good examples. I know that I had a friend die a couple years ago, and when I was like, I'm gonna leave for the day. He was my boss at the time. Matthew was, and he made some joke, and it was and we had known each other for like 3 months, and it was exactly what I needed. But if he had said it to anybody else who had just come over and said that their friend had died, they would have been mortified by it. It's Yeah. I want to also point out, when it comes to these kinds of dark humor, it's not something that it's not making fun of the person that's dying or died or anything else, because I know that people are really uncomfortable with a lot of this. There's, I one of my favorite movies of the last few years is Jojo Rabbit, which is a comedy about the Holocaust, and it is not making fun of the Jews and the victims of the Holocaust at all, but because there's humor in proximity to that, there's some people who just don't have a taste for that. And I understand that impulse, but the humor within proximity of something, or even humor about something, you have to understand the target of the humor, and I think that that's an important thing that a lot of people don't get. So I really hope that the few stories that I found funny that I just explained make a little more sense, given that I obviously don't think that, I don't think it's everyone's cup of tea to laugh about death, but it helps a lot. It helps to be able to look at death or depression or cancer or Alzheimer's, and just kind of like, by laughing at it, you're just kind of like giving it the finger. Not giving the victim of those things the finger, giving the death itself the finger. And that has been a really important thing, and it has been how I think I've been able to manage 20, almost 25 years of depression. Um, I genuinely feel like I'm at my most creative sometimes when I'm at my most depressed. Sometimes the depression feels like the creativity sometimes feels like the problem solving. It's like when you are trying to think of a word, and your brain, well, even if you go to sleep, you could wake up in the middle of the night and it'll have popped into your head because your brain never shuts off for that. sometimes when it comes to depression, my personal depression, I have felt that it is my brain trying to figure something out, and then the creativity is me thinking of that word. And so humor is a way of dealing with that too. Humor has, I don't do too much that I consider very serious when it comes to my writing, or when I was doing film, when I was working more on filmmaking. Nothing is very uh, none of the stuff that I'm most proud of, at least, has been very over dramatic or self serious. It's important to balance it with levity, even if it's dark levity. And sometimes, most importantly, if it's dark levity. I mean, it's it is the way I get through the fall. It is the way I get through depression. Um, Even the episode titles of these, I've been trying to be respectful when I'm making these episode titles. When it's a topic that is a little more serious, I've been a little less glib with them. This one is a serious topic where I don't think, like, because I don't have a guest that's talking, I'm not going to be disrespectful to the guest by naming it something funny. So my plan is in regards to the fact that it is the fall. I hate the fall, and I just happened to have finished the show Lucifer this week. And so it inspired me, and this episode will be titled "The Fallen One," in regards to me, and my depression. Although, to be honest, even in this sense of seasonal depression, I've never had such good depression in my life, because everything else is working pretty well right now, and I've been working hard and being diligent about the depression I can control. And I'm out in the sun as much as I can be right now, to get some of that vitamin D and all the things that need for seasonal depression. I'm not as bad on the weekends, for sure. But anyway, this was a great daylight savings episode, and I will talk to you all next week. Who hopefully I will have a guest. I don't know who that is yet. If you have any desire to be a guest, please email me at talkingaboutthebigstuff@gmail.com. Oh, I just saw we have a new follower on Instagram. That's cool. I did receive my first piece of fan mail this week, and it was from a listener named Matthew, and he wrote, "Wow, he wrote, wow, that Matthew guy is great. I really like that Matthew guest. 3 episodes. He must be the best guest," which, as you can guess, is the Matthew that was my guest. That's the one piece of fan mail I've received so far. It doesn't have to be fan mail. I don't mean fan. That sounds super ridiculous, but mail. It's the only piece of talking about the big stuff mail that I have received that was not like spam from like one of these blogging sites or whatever I've been like posting stuff. Anyway, have a great week, everybody, and try to not have seasonal depression. Do what you can, and I'll talk to you later.